Hello class, so today we are looking at an essay written by expert on Nietzsche. So we're getting into Nietzsche now that we've touched a little bit on Schopenhauer. So we're looking at this essay by Keith Ansell-Pearson titled Attachment to Life, Understanding Death, Nietzsche, and D.H. Lawrence. Okay, and so the reason I chose this essay is because it helps us understand Epicurus more, and then it also helps us understand Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, and so Keith Ansell-Pearson is a specialist on Nietzsche, and we're not going to touch on D.H. Lawrence or Lady Chatterley's lover or anything like that. I'm going to just focus on Nietzsche. That's really all we have time for. So I want to just look at the opening quote that Ansell-Pearson includes from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, from Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And that quote is rather interesting because we have these points about the sublime man as a penitent of the spirit who is not known to laughter and beauty and has a wild beast in his eyes that is not overcome, but yet the exalted man is not just the sublime man because beauty cannot be attained just by a sublime penitent. So the exalted man for Nietzsche is someone who has the understanding that the sublime cannot just be reached by the mind alone, and that it is accessed by way of the living earthly body. Okay, and so that takes a bit more of an understanding of Kant's notion of the sublime, which I don't want to get into right now. So I want to just show that the emphasis I think that Ansell-Pearson is wanting us to recognize is that feature of the lived experience as connecting us with our body in the world, the here and now, okay, which is also an element that is shared by Epicurus, okay? So the point that the point that we want to make is that with Nietzsche, as Ansell-Pearson points out, Nietzsche has an interesting relationship to the way he addresses death because it is similar to Epicurus. So Nietzsche wants us to reconcile ourselves with our inevitable fate away from the immortal soul of Plato and by extension Christianity. So in other words, Nietzsche wants us to focus on death's recognition of mortality. So in other words, our recognition of mortality is a recognition of our passing time and our passing life. So in other words, death shouldn't be something that preoccupies us because we are not transfixed with an immortal existence in an afterlife, okay? And so in other words, death is something that is a fact of life, but it's not something to be obsessed on, okay? It's not something to be transfixed on. Rather, we should be focusing ourselves on life. So for Nietzsche, death is a stupid fact of life, yet we can die proudly having lived a good life. So Nietzsche wants us to get away from seeing a lead up to death as a submission of the body and as a submission of the will, okay? So as are the ascetics of the spirit, so to speak, we are reminded of Schopenhauer's pessimism and of the noumenon, whereby the will strips the individuality and strips us of individuality, and death is a regular feature, and hence Schopenhauer shows us that this is one of the problems of life and one of the reasons we should be pessimistic toward life, right? But that for Nietzsche, though, there's no greater banality than death. So death, Nietzsche takes off from where Schopenhauer leaves us with the power of the will. Rather, Nietzsche wants us to focus on the will to power. So Nietzsche's focus is less on the will and more on power, okay? So then for Nietzsche, we should die brightly and joyfully as the onset of owning our death as a way to see our life as a summation. So in other words, death is irrational and it is a contradiction of life as a direct critique of Christianity, okay? So in other words, always remember that Nietzsche is working in direct contrast to Christianity. So he is late 19th century thinker who is surprisingly Epicurean. Okay, so with Epicurus, we can renounce our fear of death, and for Nietzsche, we can renounce our fear of an after death. So renounce our fear of any sense of heaven or hell, and this is in line with Epicurus. So Epicurus for Nietzsche was a heroic, idyllic philosopher, whereby with pleasure, we are then becoming physically embodied. So in other words, remember that Epicurus placed a premium on ridding ourselves of pain in order to achieve pleasure. And so that has the connection of getting ourselves back into our physical body, away from this way of doing philosophy whereby we are only thinking of the importance of the mind. With Nietzsche and Epicurus, we're focusing on the lived physical experience as important, rather than placing a premium on an afterlife, as Nietzsche thought Christians were working towards. So conquering a fear of death spells freedom for the body as lived experience, right? So remember that Ansell-Pearson points out that Epicurus had a so-called tetrapharmakos, where we have the this is a fourfold remedy. So the fourfold remedy has 4 parts. So one is God should not concern us. So remember that as in the letter to Menocius, whereby we shouldn't attribute false ideas onto the gods. Therefore, we should not concern ourselves with the affairs of the gods, because we'll make ourselves more miserable. B, death is not to be feared. C, what is good is easy to obtain. D, what is bad is easily avoided. So then this is the tetrapharmakos of Epicurus, which also ties us into Nietzsche. So for Epicurus, overcoming a fear of death is a spiritual exercise. So the key then is not only to tie it into the materialism of Epicurus, but also to tie in the way in which we're understanding the fears of an afterlife, and likewise the way in which we're thinking of our attributing false ideas to the gods. Okay, so this idea of attributing false ideas to the gods is something that Nietzsche is keen into. So for our longing for immortality, as a Christian would have it, needs to be removed. So death is nothing to us, is a philosophical therapeutic to help us understand the relevance of our lives, okay? So for Nietzsche, to cherish the once only death is a character of existence, okay? So, for Nietzsche, we need to cherish the once only character of existence. So in other words, we only, given that immortality is something that we cannot have, then we need to cherish the time that we do have. And this is where we get just the very common sense of valuing the moment, gaining pleasure from the lived moment, and astonishment and pleasure for the lived moments of living and physically being here and placed on the earth in this body, okay? And so that's what's important for Nietzsche, because if we are attendant to an afterlife that is always having us transfixed with something that is away from us, then this is not, this is taking the focus away from our lives as lived experience in this body, in this physical presence, okay? So Ansell-Pearson also focuses on this aphorism, and I'm going to show you where that's at specifically in the essay. So it's aphorism 501 from Daybreak, or Ansell-Pearson refers to it as the dawn. So whereby we have this idea that the accomplishment of knowledge for Nietzsche is an abandonment of this idea that we're going to live forever in either in hell or in heaven, okay? Because when we are removed with that obligation of immortality, or the fear of immortality, or even the wish of immortality, for Nietzsche, he's thinking that that compromises our willingness to have courage to make mistakes in life. Likewise, it also removes the fear of experimentation and creativity. So always remember that Nietzsche's goal was to get us to be more creative with the way that we're living, apart from the Christian doctrine, to be focused on the way that we are experiencing our lives as lived physical presence on this earth in this body, okay? And that's what's important. So in other words, get away from this idea of that Christianity has, that we're going to have immortality. Nietzsche wants death to bring levity to life. So in other words, regulation, we need to then own our death. So in other words, this idea of owning one's death is the sense that knowing that we're going to die is a brute fact, but yet having the knowledge that we have lived to the fullest of our capacity as human beings within a body, beyond a sense of Christianity, is something like what Nietzsche wanted us to do. So in other words, owning our life is also owning our death. So I think that takes us to the end of Nietzsche, and thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.